A very good morning to everyone and welcome to the Art of Adaptation, a virtual public talk co-organized by the Asian Festival of Children's Content and the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. This talk is part of AFCC Digital, a lead-up event to the 2020 Asian Festival of Children's Content, which will take place from 3rd to 4th October. Organized by the Singapore Book Council, we are a non-profit organization which promotes Singapore literature and supports the literary arts scene through the programs we organize. Before we begin, we would like to make some housekeeping announcements. For this session, you may use the comment section on the AFCC Facebook page to submit questions and comments. This session will be recorded and will be made available on AFCC's Facebook page and the Book Council's official YouTube channel. There will be a short Q&A with our speakers after the presentation, and we will be answering questions that have been submitted through the comment section of this live stream over at the official Facebook page. Please be advised that given our time constraints, we are only able to entertain a limited number of questions. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce our moderator for today's talk on adaptation. Galen Yeoh is the CEO and creative director of the Moving Visuals Company. His diverse credits include award-winning factual and entertainment content for leading Asian and international broadcasters, including Discovery, History Channel, National Geographic, NHK, Disney, and MediaCorp. Galen, over to you, please.
Thanks, Carlo, and good morning to everyone. Thanks for joining us. For the next hour, we'll be talking about adaptation, which in many cases refers to how books, comics, or game properties get turned into TV shows and films, or vice versa. So over the years as a producer myself, this question comes up time and time again, which is, how can we make a movie out of a book, out of my book, or I have a children's book and I want to make an animation out of this. Is there some magic thought process? Is it just instinct? Are there perhaps properties that work better? What is gained or lost in the process of adaptation? And so today the aim is really to explore the synergy between, the different mediums and cover some of the issues with actual case studies and insight by practitioners who have worked in this space. And we're very lucky today to have a distinguished panel of creators and producers that I would like to introduce to you all now. And first up, we have Lisa Hoppe from Australia. Lisa is the writer and producer of H is for Happiness, which she's going to talk about today. She has extensive experience as a writer, script editor, and script producer across a wide range of Australian TV shows, including The Deep, an animated kids series that screened in 130 countries and was in fact adapted from a comic book. And then next from Singapore, we have Moy Saha. Moy, welcome. Moy is the founder and CEO of August Media Holdings. August Media develops, manages, and produces IP for kids and family, and works with creators from all over the world. He's worked with some great brands that he's going to go through in his catalog. And his company is also producing the animated version of Sherlock Sam, a book which is co-written by our next speaker, Aidan Jimenez. Aidan, are you there? So, writing under the name AJ Low, Aidan is co-creator and writer of the popular award-winning Sherlock Sam series with his partner Felicia Low Jimenez. And they've got 15 books in the series, which have been the stories about Singapore's greatest kid detective. They've won multiple awards, and they've also been published internationally. So Aidan himself is a self-confessed Lego video game and comic book geek, and an animated Sherlock Sam series is in the works, which we'll talk about. And next we have Peter Herbert from Australia. Peter, hi Peter. Peter is the head of screen business and producing at the prestigious Australian Film, Television and Radio School. He's an accomplished writer, producer, and executive producer himself. And he served as head of comedy and entertainment at Granada, Australia. He's been the executive producer at Beyond International and head of development at Crawford Productions, among other stellar roles. And finally, we have Dr. Pia Akilia. Pia, hi Pia. Pia is the head of screenwriting at the Australian Film, TV and Radio School. She is a script writer, script editor, and director in her own right, and she's combined her creative practice with her academic career. She's worked both in Singapore and Australia in various roles as the Associate Dean at Tisch School of the Arts Asia and head of program at UNSW Asia and the University of Newcastle. Peter and Pia will actually be holding a pitching masterclass in August. More details on that after the session. And so right now, what we're gonna do is we're gonna kick this off with a clip from Lisa Hoppe. H is for Happiness. And this is a family feature film that actually won Best Film at CinefestOz in 2019. And it earned the Jury Special Mention Award at this year's Berlin Film Festival. So over to you, and let's watch the video.
It's perfect.
Ta-da!
Thank you.
What do you want a bike for, sweetie?
I'm not at liberty to say, except that it's for a good cause.
Well, I'm happy to give you the bike, Pumpkin. You don't have to come sailing with me to pay for it.
I know, but I do need to talk with you. In private. I've got a plan to execute, and I'm beginning with you. I couldn't blame rich Uncle Brian for being surprised that I wanted to go on his yacht, because I cannot swim. I don't have sea legs. I don't have sea arms. In fact, no part of my anatomy is sea anything.
Great. Okay, Lisa, we're now going to talk about your film, H is for Happiness. We want to find out how she came to adapt that from the young adult book, My Life as an Alphabet. So Lisa, over to you. Tell us about it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Galen. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here talking about some of my favourite things, stories, and how to get them onto the screen. So I have, as Galen mentioned, I've got a background in television writing. And then about 10 years ago, I went back to film school, to AFTRS, to study producing. And during my master's at AFTRS, where I combined writing and producing, I'd written a research paper on how these sort of small live action family films worked. I'd escaped into them growing up and loved watching them with my kids. The world that they invite you into has a simplicity and an innocence, but the good ones have really complex characters and relationships. And while they're not about saving the world, they make you, the stakes are really high for the characters, and they make you want to go on the journey as they navigate these human level issues. So films like My Girl, because of Winn-Dixie, coming out of the US, and Paper Planes and Oddball out of Australia. So when I finished my master's, I had a very clear goal of wanting to find a project to adapt in that family genre. I read dozens of young adult and children's novels looking for the right property. And My Life as an Alphabet by author Barry Jonsberg really captured my heart and my imagination. It's about a 13-year-old girl who wants to put her broken family back together after some heartbreak. And so while there are sad moments, it's essentially very funny and uplifting. And the lead character, the irrepressible Candice Fee, is very distinctive, and the story is multi-layered in terms of, you know, the themes, which include family, friendship, grief, and especially difference. So these, you know, all kind of came together for me, and as well as the fact that the book met this kind of creative criteria and commercial criteria that I'd set out for myself. And when I say creative criteria, I mean an idea that resonates so strongly with me and excites me that I know that it will sustain me for a very long time, because it takes a long time to bring anything to the screen. And because it's a film for families, I was looking for something really entertaining, a film that is a film visual medium. So I wanted, you know, something that had a lot of action and cinematic scope. And in terms of the commercial viability, this is my own sort of criteria. It was a contained story, so it's set in a small town, small cast. So I knew that it could be realised with a modest budget and in a really stunning part of Australia. There was also great adult roles, which would appeal to really fabulous adult cast, and that would help trigger finance. And there was an identifiable audience, really important. And because the themes were universal, it meant it would appeal to audiences around the world. And we did have that fantastic fortune of screening in Berlin earlier this year, before COVID sort of shut everything down. And the audiences were just really enthusiastic, and it was great to be there and watch them kind of connect with this story that was filmed and set in Australia, but obviously resonated for them. And I think there's a great sense of hope in this film for adults and children. So, and just one example that I thought, just to finish my little bit with what happens in the adaptation process. So the main character, Candace Fee, has a relationship with a goldfish in a bowl in the book. And I took that out to make room for more active and more visual parts of the story in the script. But when it was being pitched in Cannes to sales agents and distributors around the world, the question kept coming up: is there an animal in the film? So we then, the idea to include this mini horse came in, and so even though it came in quite late in the writing process, it was just this kind of, realization that it opened up some opportunities for humour and adventure, including making it to the climactic scene with quite a bit of pizzazz. So there's always this sort of tension between being faithful to the original material, but allowing some new things to take on prominence in the story in order to serve the interest of the film. So yeah, that's some background on H is for Happiness.
Great. Could you just walk us quickly through the timeline of, finding the book and actually getting it made into the film? And also, I just like to know, how did the author, did the author have any input into it? And tell us a little bit about that. Or did they did you have to convince them that you were going to do something great with it? Tell us a bit more.
Okay, so I read the book straight out of film school, as I said, in amongst a whole great dozens of books. So this was actually a few years after, because I ended up working on a whole bunch of other things. And then I went back to the book because it stayed with me, and that was actually a really important indicator for me that it was really worth pursuing. And I didn't actually have trouble getting the option, and they trusted me with it. And so when the script was finished, I was very nervous about sharing it with the author. I was under no real obligation to work with the author, and I'm sure in some projects you need to, but not with this one. He rang me out of the blue and said, I've read it and I really like it. And so that was really important. And then he came with us on the journey from that point, as in we brought him onto set. He's in a little cameo. He had a great time being part of the journey. That was really important. One of the things that I was going to say about, the challenges is knowing what to leave out and what to leave in, and considering the fan base. If there's fans, how do you want to please them, and you want to please the author. But Barry's on-screen cameo was a bit of a on-screen endorsement by him. So, yeah.
Is there going to be a follow-up from this film? What next?
Yeah, for me, I've actually optioned a different book. I think that the team some of the team might be working on another of Barry's books, but I was kind of keen to flex my muscles on a slightly different genre of family film. So I've actually often optioned another one, and I'm in the middle of writing that, but a similar model, if you like, to H is for Happiness, in that it's got great adult roles, and yeah, it's got all the tropes of a family feature. So yeah, very different film though. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. We'll come back and talk a bit more. Now I'm going to move over to Moy Saha. Moy is a very accomplished producer and from August Media, and he's worked on over 50 live action and animated titles, 7 of which he's told us have been actually adaptations. So Moy, over to you to tell us more about what you do.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of talk about some of the work that we do. I just want to talk a little bit about our company, August Media. We set ourselves up in 2010, and one of the fundamental reasons why we set ourselves up at that time was that when we were looking at statistics of Hollywood box office collections, one of the things that we observed that in the last 16 years, more than 40 to, and at that time it was 40%, and now it's substantially more than that, perhaps in the range of about 75%. Almost 75% of all box office collections can be attributed to adaptation. So, I mean, you talk about comic books, prequels, sequels, and, I think most of us here have obviously seen a lot of the Marvel Comics adaptations, the DC Comics adaptations, which are like the really big ones. But even if you look at some of the most successful other movies, whether it's Harry Potter or, these are things that have all come from books. And one of the things that we tried to do was to kind of institutionalize that from Singapore. So we went out and acquired a whole bunch of property, which are iconic properties globally, stuff like George of the Jungle and so on and so forth, and then try to create a whole business out of it, which kind of in the last 10 years, I should say, kind of turned out pretty well. What I'd love to do is to kind of walk everybody through some of the stuff that we have done before. So here goes. So that's August Media, my company. In case you see the logo somewhere, please say hi. We are a company, we've been, heavily awarded with awards around the world. These are only some of the awards that we've listed here, which kind of we've got in Asia, but we've been part of the list at the Emmys, at tons of awards in North America, the Kids Screen Awards, and so on and so forth. Even in this screen as we speak, there are at least 3 properties here which have gone through multiple adaptations. The Adventures of Sherlock Sam is what we thought Sherlock Sam, the book series, would end up to be, and Adan is going to talk a little bit more about it. Of course, it's taken a little bit of a different shape right now. Dino Girl Gauko is our latest release when it comes to adaptations. It's on Netflix worldwide right now. Barangay 143 is an adult TV series, anime TV series, which has now been adapted not just for comic books, but also in fashion lines, right? So there's a whole fashion line which is inspired by the philosophy of Barangay 143. There's more stuff that we've done. George of the Jungle, I think a lot of you might have possibly heard about that. That's our co-production with DreamWorks. DreamWorks Animation, that's a property that we own and is literally played in every single country where television is allowed. Tilda Appleseed and the kids from Seagull Street, both of which are very big book properties from Germany. Wendy, again, is a very big European property, which is a published property which has been around since the 1940s, which we have adapted into a TV series, which has been hugely successful. But I just want to talk, obviously there's a lot that we can talk about when it comes to adaptations, but I will specifically focus on a couple of properties. Sherlock Sam, written by the highly talented duo who goes by the name AJ Low, and Adan will tell you more about it. It's one of Singapore's, I would say the best literary works for kids. Every kid in Singapore is crazy about this book series. We kind of we have embarked on the journey of trying to adapt this into a TV series. It has been a process where it's kind of complicated in the sense that the art style, which and the looks of the characters that children recognize is kind of difficult to do in animation, especially on kids television. But we've been working on it, and I think we should see it on television pretty soon. It's too early to tell which channel or which network it would be on. But this is what the adaptation of Sherlock Sam looks like. One of the first things that has changed about it is it's now a colorful world, which is set in Singapore. So it took us quite a while to kind of figure out how do we stick to the original art style, the original, the feelings that go behind, feelings and sensibilities that go behind Sherlock, and kind of bring that forward. The next one, is to also kind of figure out how is it that we talk about a TV series which is essentially from a book which is set in Singapore and yet make it international enough so as to not alienate people outside of Singapore. So that is quite a challenge, and which is why those of you who are familiar with Singapore, you'll see that we have kind of taken the Singapore skyline, but that we have spent a reasonable amount of time trying to change that as well to kind of make it a little bit more generic. I suppose we'll talk a little bit more about Sherlock Sam later. Here's another property, Barangay 143. This is our co-production with TV Asahi and Synergy 88 of the Philippines. This show has won a tremendous amount of critical acclaim last year at the Asian Television Awards and the Asian Academy Creative Awards. We won, we kind of gathered almost 12, exactly 12 nominations, and we ended up with 3 wins. And this has been a very interesting topic. This is one of the first original animated shows from Southeast Asia, which is kind of going across to North Asia and so on and so forth. It's done in an anime style, which is typically something that comes out of North Asia, but here's a reverse thing. And naturally it's undergone its process, and now there's a comic book series which is coming out. Perhaps later in the sessions, I can talk a little bit about how is it that you make sure that you create a comic book series out of a TV series and yet keep the comic book series interesting. What is it that you do to the story? How do you split the stories? And and everything is so character driven. So what are the lessons that we've learned about how to segregate characters between one medium and another? And finally, I want to talk about a very, very talented director called Akira Shingino. Akira Shingino, I think many of you might have seen a lot of his work. He's one of the directors of Shin-chan and Doraemon, which are just absolutely iconic Japanese properties. They've had more than, Doraemon has, I believe, more than 5,000 episodes, and I think about 40 or 45 movies. Shinchan is also, really, really big. So Akira Shingino created this character called Naoko. There's this little girl out here who I think a lot of you can see. Naoko, the story is actually very simple. It's about how we have, how our characters are so different when we are happy versus when we are angry. So the whole, comic book series that he had created was really about a little girl who's, absolutely the model child, very good at studies, works really hard at school, helps her mother out. But there is just one problem. When she gets angry, she turns into a fire-breathing dinosaur who just kind of goes and burns everything down in her path, right? So, and through comedy, the show is really about the struggle between Naoko and Gauko. Gauko is the fire-breathing dinosaur, and all of the tricky situations that Naoko and Gauko land up in. This is a show that that was shopped around for a long time. I think it took 5 years to kind of turn it into animated series. The animated series is now called Dino Girl Gauko. It's a Netflix original, and the first season for Dino Girl Gauko was released in November of last year, and in February of this year, just before the lockdowns started, the COVID lockdown started, there was a second season that dropped. If you guys have, if you would like to check out a little bit more about what Gauko is, please go ahead and kind of watch the clips, watch some of the episodes on Netflix. It's available worldwide. Before I finish, what I want to do is, I'm going to show a short clip of Gauko, and once I'm done with that, I'm very happy to kind of talk more about the process that went behind kind of adapting these from one medium to another. So let me just quickly jump over to the other one. And just a minute. Share.
What's wrong, Naoko?
Today's Mom's birthday!
Oh, is it really?
Dad, don't tell me you haven't done anything for her!
I completely forgot.
Oh, great. Oh no, what are we gonna do? We're doomed!
Oh, Naoko, calm down. It's only a birthday.
All right, so I'm going to stop right there. This particular episode is about how Naoko and her father incidentally is a frog for some reason. Naoko and her father have forgotten that it's the mom's birthday. And last year when that had happened, mom had cooked for the next 7 days for the father with death-themed food. So, and all the interesting stuff that happens right after. Thank you. Galen, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Moy. That looks great. I look forward to asking you more questions about that later. I'm going to move over to Adan first. Here we have the co-creator and author of Sherlock Sam himself, Adan Jimenez. Adan, can you tell us a bit more about Sherlock Sam and tell us a bit about the evolution from how you started the book and how how that's led to the current adaptation from Moy's side?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm Dan, and I do write the Sherlock Sam books with my wife and partner Felicia, who couldn't be here, but you can see her there, sort of. We've been writing these books now for 6-7 years, somewhere around there, maybe more. I can't remember now, but yeah, maybe around there. And we've got 15 out so far. And like writing a book is fairly, well, it's easier than trying to adapt it into another media because it's just me and Felicia coming up with whatever crazy ideas we have and then putting them down to paper. And we don't have to worry about budgets or how easy something is to draw or animate or, you know, voice talent or any of that kind of stuff. We just, whatever weird and crazy nonsense that comes into our heads, we can put it down into the story, and the only thing we have to worry about is our editor telling us that something doesn't work, and then we have to rework it, right? But otherwise, it's, you know, anything goes for us, which is great. But when Moy and August, you know, were interested in the stories and picked it up to make an animated series out of it, we very quickly realized that there's a lot of things that, you know, that work on the page very well that don't necessarily work on screen in an animated form. And so like Moy showed a little, one little picture of the original version of what the Sherlock Sam show was going to look like. And that version was very different from the books. Sherlock was aged a bit more. You saw Watson was like this sort of spherical robot instead of a cube. And you know, and there was lots and lots of differences. And Felicia and I were working with the script writers at the time and the you know, the people trying to put the show together. And we very quickly, very early on, decided that like we had to kind of like, we don't know how this industry works. We don't know how, like, Felicia and I have never really written a script before. We've never worked on an animated project, so we were pretty hands off. Like we gave our input. We went to various meetings. We were in the writers room, so we could pitch a lot of different ideas and stuff. But very quickly, we sort of kind of took a back seat because we realized we actually don't know how this works. So we need to kind of let the people who do know how it works take the lead and let them kind of. And so a lot of these, you know, is not to say that, you know, that I think that show could have worked as well. And I think it would have been quite interesting because it would have been a very different sort of feel of Sherlock and a very different sort of, you know, a different kind of Sherlock. And I think that could have worked quite well. But I guess as they were trying to pitch it to various people, a lot of people were saying like, well, this actually isn't Sherlock enough. Like, you know, this isn't Sherlock Sam. This is something different. And we don't want to buy a Sherlock Sam show that isn't Sherlock Sam. So we had to go back and kind of, you know, and so Moy showed some of the newer images that look a lot more like the Sherlock Sam books, where the art style is a lot closer to what our artist Andrew Tan put in the book. And even the stories are a lot more like, you know, again, we're in the writer's room and we've been well, not in the room. We've been doing, thanks to COVID, it's all been Zoom as well. But we've been in those rooms as well. And, you know, and in this new iteration of the show, you know, they're writing scripts based directly off of the stories in the books. And of course, things have to change again because, you know, we can't wait, you know, 2 episodes to introduce half of the main cast like we did for the books and things like that, right? So, but it's like, it's a very interesting process for us. And a lot of times we're just very like, I think originally, like, we were just very happy that someone was interested to make this into an animated series. We were like, yay, sure, do whatever you want as long as, you know, Sherlock Sam's on screen. And now we're a bit more like, now we know a little bit more about how the process works. We have, there's the guy that we've been working with at August is named Yoshia. And he's been great, you know, kind of shepherding us through this process. And like, he's also like, he's a veteran of like TV and stuff. Like he's worked for Turner Broadcasting and he's worked for Netflix and stuff. Like he's worked for lots of places. So good job, Moy, hiring him. So he's been really great shepherding us through all this stuff. And yeah, I mean, it's been a really interesting process for us, you know, to go from, you know, just writing our books with almost no like input from anybody else. You know, again, with the exception of our editor who will come in and tell us when things don't work, to going and working with like a huge team. Well, not a huge team, a fairly, you know, bigger than just the two of us anyway. And, you know, listening to their ideas and kind of giving control over of our characters, of our babies, these characters that we've lived with for like 8 years now, and giving control over to people and seeing, you know, the awesome ideas that they come up with, and then kicking ourselves for not thinking up of these ideas, you know, first. But yeah, that's me. Thanks.
Hey, that's great. Aidan, can you tell us, you know, because you're the writer on the panel and the creator, you know, I'm sure there are writers out there that want to know, you know, were you worried at all? You know, it's kind of your baby, right? Sherlock Sam is your baby along with your partner. Were you worried about anything initially?
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely worried about like how other people would use, you know, how other people would use our characters, how they would write these characters. And like I said, the first iteration was very, very different. Sherlock had been aged up. Some of the characters they had cut because they felt there were too many characters in the books. So they cut some of the characters out. And like, of course that hurt us because like some of those were our favorite characters. And like, but they had to, you know, they told us like, you know, if you have too many characters, you know, you won't be able to really focus enough time on them. And so it's better to have less characters and focus on them. And again, you know, us being very new to this process in this industry, we said, okay, we defer to your expertise. Let's do that. And, you know, like I said, I still think that show could have worked. I think that would have been a very different, but very interesting show. But of course, yeah, we were like, oh no, you know, they're butchering our books. They're taking our stories. They're making them completely different. Right. This sort of situation. But at the end of the day, these guys, like, you know, I think if it was the other way around, if, you know, one day Moy came to us and said, hey, I have this TV show that I want you guys to write a book about, I think that the opposite would be true as well. Like the creators of the show would be a bit worried about how we would write. And of course things would have to change because like I said, things that work on the page don't work on the screen. The vice versa is also true. Things that work on the screen don't work on the page. And so lots of things would have to change in order to make them work in the medium that we're trying to tell that story in. So yes, we're worried, you know, we were worried, but at the same time, we also understand that this is how it works. Like this is how adaptation works. You can't have a one-to-one, a transfer because it's going to be it's not going to be very good. Like the first 2 Harry Potter movies tried to do that, a one-to-one transfer from book to movie, and they were not very good. It wasn't until the 3rd film where lots of liberties were taken with the books to make them into a movie that then started to get very, very good. So yeah.
And another quick question. So just to clarify, what, you know, our understanding from the production side is once we option the rights, you know, in this case, August Media's team would take over and just run with it. But how are you still involved in any way with the adaptation? Are you like a consultant or how does that work? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, Felicia and I are consultants, which is why we get to be in the writer's room. And this isn't the case for every adaptation, obviously. But, you know, we appreciate that August values our input enough to want to bring us aboard as story consultants. So while we haven't been writing any of the scripts, because again, we've never done that before, we don't really know how that works. We have been working with the script writers who are writing scripts, and then, you know, we feed back and we tell them things that you know, that kind of work, like especially this time around where like they're trying to hew closer to the books. They will ask us questions like, is this something that Sherlock would do, or is this something that Jimmy would do? And then we give feedback based on that. And, you know, and sometimes we'll just read the script and say like, this is very funny. This is totally something Sherlock would do. Or, you know, maybe this part can be like, you know, especially for mystery writing stuff. I'm not sure how much experience the scriptwriters have on writing mystery specifically. So sometimes Felicia and I will step in and say like, well, we need to introduce a little bit, you know, currently the way that this is written, the reveal comes out of left field. Like there's nothing supporting that reveal. So we got to put in a little bit more clues, you know, in the middle of the story or at the beginning of the episode, et cetera, things like that. So yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Great, thanks, Aidan. I'm going to throw over now to Peter Herbert, our next speaker, and we'll come back to you with more questions later. So Peter, you're going to discuss, you know, the nuances and techniques of adapting content, you know, for the marketplace. You know, let's hear from you, because it is very much, we've been discussing the creative aspects, and I think, you know, you might want to discuss and remind us more about the business aspects of it as well.
Yes,
go ahead.
Thank you, Galen. Thank you. It's been very interesting listening to some of the many experiences of the previous speakers, covering quite a lot. But I want to go to those issues, the nuances of the actual business side of adaptation. And for those of you out there listening, the issue of rights has been mentioned several times, and so much begins with that issue in adaptation. When somebody writes something, an author who writes something, they have a large range of rights, and the issue often is, what do they sell, if they can sell, or in what stages do they sell? And Aidan just mentioned Harry Potter, which of course we've now witnessed over many years move its way through different formats and different types of production very, very successfully. And at each stage, a different set of rights kicks in. So for a successful run of books, children's books, the idea that you would just make a film or you would just make a piece of TV has really been demonstrated not to be the case often, because state adaptations are now so important, and beyond that, just merchandise and characterization, all those sort of issues. So for authors, it's very important in the first instance that their publishing contracts are well managed and well structured, so that they don't give away rights that they don't have to give away, and they are able to exploit the successes of their writing and their hard work in a fruitful and profitable way. That really gets down to why authors often find and continue working with trusted producers and trusted production houses. To me, when we teach this at the Film and Television School, Australian Film and Television School, we often encourage relationships between the writers and the producers, so that there is a mutually beneficial understanding of what one is doing with the property and how best to manage it and get it to an audience. Right at the very beginning of this talk, Lisa Hoppe, she studied producing, Lisa, and but has a fine writer's eye and talent as well. That sort of combination is terrific in the sense that you know what you want to do and you know the market you're going to attack. When we do teach this, particularly to the producing students, we cover in very simple terms the structure of what, how, and why. In really simple terms, yes, what do you want to adapt? How are you going to adapt it, and why are you going to adapt it? And as we've heard, producers often read many books and scout many books before they select a property. To pick up on another thing that Moy mentioned, it is well researched that adaptation is by far the most successful process for success in the screen media world. I think Moy mentioned about 75%, and that's been heavily influenced by successes such as the Marvel comics and Harry Potter. But in our research in Australia indicates that the adaptations are, in feature film, are much more successful than the original scripts. that the audience finds some sort of comfort or avenue into the property that already exists. And so adaptation is a huge and richly rewarding aspect of our business. And for anybody who wants to get into screen media creation, content creation, it's a terrific way to go. The issue of how requires quite a lot of research. The market itself is very complex, and the idea of whether or not you're going to be animating or in live action or comic books, all these sort of adaptation formats need to be carefully considered. In Australia, we have quite a lot of structures that provide commercial incentives for writer-producer teams to pursue co-productions. It would be probably safe to say that a great deal of children's adaptation requires co-productions, and not much is solely funded in any one territory. So you have format issues that kick in regarding adapting and changing the properties so that they appeal not just to your home market, but around the world, around the globe. So there's quite a lot that producers do in terms of working with Americans, Canadians, the European producers, in terms of just being able to finance the project and get it to the audience. The final thing I'll talk about in just this brief introduction is zeitgeist. I work very closely with the writing cohort in this area, but the what, how, and why, well, the why really goes to what you're trying to say, what type of audience you're pitching for in the contemporary times. And, you know, it's no secret that COVID has changed much about how the world operates, and there'll be a lasting effect. So to me, when an event like that happens, you start to wonder what type of properties are going to be written and what the zeitgeist feeling of the market will be. Will people close down, or will they expand out? What are the effects of such an event? And from a producing point of view, you read a property that you wish to adapt, but it has to speak, I think, to you and to an audience in terms of relevancy. And it's not, and it's interesting, but it's not always that just the sheer volume of the number of books or the success of the sales of books is sufficient. The most interesting and nuanced thing is to try and navigate your way to a particular audience and speak to that audience about something that is relevant right now. There are many examples, but you know, in our course, we would spend time debating certain zeitgeist issues. You know, one of them is populist politics under Donald Trump. You know, that's dominated the talk of the world. What effect does that have on, you know, what might you do in terms of looking for properties to adapt? Or at the other end, you know, culturally specific stories that, you know, attack some very culturally small little part of the world and tell it very authentically and truthfully. As with H is for happiness, you know, at the moment I look at that, I think I sort of know where I am. I'm familiar with a very keen adaptation of a small part of the world. So there's many different ways to go, and over the range of our course, particularly in the producing structure, we spend a lot of time in terms of just the discussions and theories of how one might adapt and what audiences one might reach in any one approach. As I say, we've got a workshop coming up, and we'll be talking about this in greater detail. But for the moment, that's it. So thank you.
Some great points there, Peter. Thank you. I particularly like the point that, you know, I think relevance is the key. I was thinking about a property, you know, 'cause I used to read a lot of comics. I was thinking about a very successful Marvel film called Black Panther. And that wasn't a particularly, you know, best-selling comic book, but I think it came at a time where there weren't, you know, there weren't a lot of Black superheroes, and, you know, it just exploded as a film. And okay, we're going to continue now. Dr. Pia Akilia is going to be our last speaker. She's the head of screenwriting at the Australian Film, TV and Radio School. And then we'll ask questions after that. Carry on, Pia.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Before I start, I just want to pay my respect to the Gauko land and people in Bronte in Sydney in Australia, where I work and play, and is also forms part of the land that the Australian Film, Television and Radio School sits on. At the school, where, as you can tell from Peter's conversation with you, we're always looking at the marketplace and the trends in that marketplace, and what's most important, how we can actually surf on those trends and hopefully get there before you know, the wave peaks, and make our writers and producers as well prepared for the marketplace as possible. Look, we know adaptation is huge across film, TV, and even audio podcasts at the moment, web, of course. And increasingly, writers are no longer, you know, lonely people sitting in isolated rooms doing their writing. They're also story producers, they're showrunners. Lisa actually came to the film school as a very experienced writer 20 years ago. Lisa and I were actually working in television together, and but she actually came to the film school to get the skills to go out into the marketplace, and that has worked very successfully for her. Our sessions that we're hoping, well, that we're definitely holding with the over the next couple of months, our session in August, our pitching session, and then our session in October about adaptation. They're really tasters, and they're tasters of some of the things that we're actually doing here at the National Film School in Australia. So the art of pitching on August 15 is really a very important skill, and probably one of the first skills that we teach writers and producers, because Peter and I do a lot of cross-teaching and collaborative teaching with the writers and producers together, because we know that they form a very important creative partnership that is right at the beginning of the film, television or media experience. And we really work on drilling down to the storytelling, or I suppose in a way, if you want to talk about it, it's really about story selling. That's what you're trying to do. You're selling a story to the marketplace. So really it gives skills to people like myself who are writers but not necessarily producers, on how to articulate the beginning, middle and end of our stories, and how the genre, theme and character journey is going to play out, so that when we're actually in front of an executive or a studio, we can really sort of engage them and sell our story to them, and hopefully go on and make the project with them. It's not something that you go into blindly. It's something that you need to be really carefully prepared for. And that's certainly where our focus is on the masterclass. It's really about being prepared for the pitch, being prepared and understanding the etiquette around pitch meetings. And then we're actually going to be following it up with some, you know, one-on-one coaching, which is really work on your pitch performance, which is really important. The Adaptation Masterclass in October. Now that's a practitioner-led program, which is something that we do a lot of at the school. We tend to bring the best of the best and the people who are very contemporary and have contemporary currency in the market to the school to actually work with our writers and producers. The workshop we're doing in October in Singapore, we're very lucky to have Lisa Hoppe with us. And, you know, we're actually going to be investigating for both films, premium and TV and other platforms, what is the best way of actually taking your source material and getting it on screen. We're really lucky to have Lisa. She's a writer who has over many, many years of experience. She's a writer-producer and she's strategic. She knows what works and doesn't work. She continues to master her craft, which is the resilience that you really need for a lifelong career. That's all from me.
Great, thank you, Pia. I'm going to just start the questions now. We have some questions from the public, but I'm going to ask a question first. I'm assuming people watching are mostly a lot of practitioners out there on either side, probably on the production side or the writer's side. How do we manage expectations? You know, because I'm a producer and a director, and you know, I meet people all the time that they want to adapt either a play into a movie, or they want to bring a book or even a comic and do something. What are some of the, I would ask, please put up your hand, whoever wants to answer this. I mean, what are some of the misconceptions about the process? I mean, what are some of the things that writers might come up to you and ask, and the expectations, you know, what expectations might they have that you might want to address? Does anyone want to answer that?
Oh, look, I'm happy to answer that because we have many students who actually apply for our program and with an existing work that they would like to actually adapt. And especially talking from the writing point of view, firstly, you know, it's going to be a long journey, and really that 2-year journey at the school is really the start of that journey, and I think Lisa can talk about that in more detail. But essentially, you're having to sell that concept first up more than anything. It's really about, do you feel confident that, you know, this concept is something that the market's ready for and that you are the right person to bring this to the market? And when you're actually committed to that and you're starting to get some, you know, interest in that idea, well, then is the moment where you start committing to that idea and really, you know, making sure that you have the business side of things in place, ensuring that you have the copyright, ensuring that you have the finance skills that are going to get you through the story development stage, and then being able to produce a really good pitch deck, a really good first draft if you're in a feature film, or, you know, breakdown and treatment. But it's a long and hard journey, but you do reap the rewards at the end of it.
Okay, great. Does anyone else want to comment on that? You know, do writers come up to you with any scenarios that you want to address?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. You know, we systematically as a company are constantly looking for pitches from writers, right? So there are tons and tons of people who kind of arrive with their books every now and then, or stuff that they have written and want us to adapt that to television. But I think for most of the time, you know, I think Peter talked a little bit about, you know, I talked a little bit about the amount of stuff that gets adapted from different media, as did Peter. You see, at the end of the day, what we are trying to do as producers, I mean, at the end, you know, it is really a commercial enterprise, and in that commercial enterprise, you're always looking for ways and means of which you can, if there is a possibility of kind of already, you know, taking an existing fan base and monetizing that, right? And adaptation is really just basically that. So from a producer's point of view, we always have to give it a long, hard think about is this something absolutely special? Does this stand out in the market beyond everything else that I have the option to produce, right? So remember, there are far, far many more books for children, for adults, for whoever else, even for certain niches. Books have been written for hundreds of years, right? I mean, and our adaptation universe is actually much shorter in that timeline. So I think the big call for us is to try and figure out. I mean, we think that it's scientifically we are taking a decision, but really speaking, there's a little bit of a gut out there where we are trying to figure out, is this something that audiences will prefer as opposed to hundreds of other shows which are releasing at the same time.
Moy, there's a question for you from the public. They just want to find out about Sherlock Sam and the timeline for that. Is that going to take a few more years, or?
I gave an example of Akira Shigino's Dino Girl, right? I mean, and that's a property that's Akira Shigino has been associated with some of iconic Japanese stuff since the 60s, right? I mean, and he's an absolute veteran. And even his work, it took us about 5 years to kind of get it to screen. So I think with Sherlock Sam, and Adam talked about how we went down a particular path and then we kind of changed that. And now we are down another path. We hope to kind of, if there wasn't COVID and so on and so forth, I think next year we should be able to kind of have a very clear path of when it's going to hit the screens. Because, I mean, as producers, we've more or less kind of written up the rest of the year in 2020. But for Sherlock, I think one of the things that dramatically changed and why we also changed our paths is that, remember that, Adan, from the time that we started kind of adapting this, the broadcasting environment has also dramatically changed, right? Today, the streamers are so much more dominant compared to what traditional broadcasters were. And as a result of which, if we were trying to create something that's commercially viable, we had to make a choice saying that, we have to go down a particular path. But today that freedom is a lot more, all right? And I think there is a real, and we love that fact that there is a real demand for kind of going back to the basics of what artists really wanted to kind of communicate through the art that they put together, through the writings that they did. And that's a great, I think that's a fantastic era that we have arrived at in the whole production, television and film production arena. Okay. And hopefully the new development of Sherlock Sam, we've got some very keen interests, too early to talk about publicly. But I think we should see something on screen sometime next year.
Great, sure. Looking forward to it. Okay, we have a question for Peter. I'm going to read it out. Peter, the audience has broadened in light of the pandemic and with the issues raised recently regarding all kinds of discrimination. You can read the question, I think. How far can we go with children's or youth content? Do you have any comments about boundaries or appropriateness?
It's such an interesting question. I think, and this is, my opinion here is you can go quite far in terms of content. I think issues of equity, diversity, culture, I think these are all rising important issues around the world. And we're seeing, partly because of social media, but also just in terms of when in a crisis time, people are really thinking very strongly about their relationships with other people, other countries, all those sort of interactions. And so to me, the depth and importance underlying a good piece of children's literature is well capable. It's certainly robust enough to be able to handle some of these bigger issues. What is interesting, to pick up on what Moy said about streaming, is how we are being exposed as audiences more and more to content and product from parts of the world that we ordinarily wouldn't have seen. I'm sure it's the case in many countries now that when you were growing up, you only got a few channels. Now there's a lot, and now there's a thing called streaming, which means you can go almost anywhere. So content that speaks to a diversity of audiences and speaks about diversity of audiences has become increasingly important. So the Black Panther example that you mentioned is a really important example, but also from a adaptation point of view, how one produces it doesn't really necessarily just go to the idea of format, but also the idea of how you would cast it, who would play it, and how you would, move your way through the representation of traditional role models and characters. So yes, in brief, I would say children's lit is well capable of managing this, and indeed will, simply because that will be the zeitgeist imperative. Thank you.
Great. We have another question here. Let me know who wants to answer this. For small-time authors and publishing houses that like to create a local animation show, how do you think we should start creating on our own, since we can't afford to hire big animation production houses? It's an interesting question. I think one, to just tag on to that, I'm not sure if the person asking wants to do it themselves or work with a partner, but this is a business where I suppose you have to work with collaborators, right? And does anyone want to answer that? Aidan or Lisa, do you want to say something?
I'll take a stab at it. So I think trying to do it by yourself, I think is nigh impossible. I think you do need to have people who are in the business, because I've as a writer, I see my not to be so pedestrian as to talk about money, but money is very important when it comes to these things. And some of the figures I've seen for how much it takes to actually put a show on the air, these are astronomical figures. This is money I'll never see in my life, most likely. So to try and do it by yourself is I think it's it's not impossible, but it's pretty close. It's better to work with a production company who knows what they're doing, who's been doing this for a while, and who has other partners as well, because it's not just a question of I make the show and that's it, because you also need broadcasting partners, you need finance partners, you need all these things that I'm sure the rest of the panel will be able to better speak about. But it's just if you're a self-published author, or you're a small publisher, I would really recommend you not trying to do it by yourself, because it's if you're a small publisher, it most likely means you don't have a lot of money as a small publisher, or as a self-published author, you're not going to have a lot of money unless you come from a rich family or something, and then okay, do whatever you want. But otherwise, you should look for try and get someone to option your rights, and then work with them to do it. And different production companies will have different ways of how to work with the author or the publishing house, if that's something that you're worried about, relinquishing control. If that's what you're worried about, understand that you will have to relinquish some control, because again, it's not going to be, authors can't make all the calls when it comes to an adaptation, whether it be live action, whether it be animation, whether it be a film or a TV series or anything like that. You have to relinquish some control. You're going to have to do that, unless you're like Stephen King or something. And even he doesn't do it all by himself, you know?
Lisa, that's a great answer, Aidan. Lisa, you mentioned that you contacted the writer for your film, I presume through the publisher. And over here in Singapore, you know, we have publishers that manage some of the rights. We have authors that are holding on to their rights and pitching ideas on their own. We don't seem to have a lot of agents that manage this. I mean, can you comment on this? Do you have, in Australia, are there a lot of agents that are out there repping properties, or do you find that it's more the case that producers are out there looking for stuff?
I think that the publishers here are pretty proactive. I've received regular emails from the various publishers about what they've got up for option, and they happily send manuscripts. They're very proactive with the producers, and they try and have relationships. We've got markets like 37 South in Melbourne where they actually have a special day devoted to it's called Books at Myth, where publishers come and pitch to producers. So, and that's really fantastic. And you create a relationship with the publishers, so they get to know you, and they'll send you books that they think that they try and work out what you're interested in, which is if you're like me and you're interested in a whole broad range of projects and formats, and it's hard to pin that down. But yeah, definitely. And I rang the publisher, so as a producer. So I don't think there were agents involved as such. That was from my point of view. Yeah.
That's very helpful. I think we're going to run out of time soon. Carlo, if there's more questions, let us know. What advice, I'm sure this will be covered in the workshop that Peter and Pierre are going to do, but what advice do you have for writers that have a book, you know, or they have a property? What advice do you have for them if they want to, as the last person asking, want to make this and see what's possible in terms of live action or animation for their property? Is there something they should do? Because I very often have people just pass me a book, and then, you know, I know we're all busy and we don't always have the time to read everything. Is there something you would encourage people to do if they're writers or publishers to make it easier for people to sort of cross over and be considered, have their IP considered for adaptation? Does anyone want to answer that?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Sorry, Peter. Yes, I do think there is. I think that the most important thing is that they need to really understand the story they're trying to tell and be able to distill it in a way that communicates to people in the film industry why this particular project may be successful. And increasingly it didn't exist when I came out of film school, which was more than 20 years ago. Pitching didn't exist. So it is a craft skill, like the many craft skills that writers need to have in their toolbox. And hopefully that pitching workshop will actually help the exact people you're talking about, Galen, who are writers, who do have this property and maybe are thinking about, adapting it for another medium. It will introduce some of those craft skills to see if they have the potential to take that to the next step.
Okay, I'm just gonna throw a final question to all of you. I mean, we've talked about how adaptations aren't just isolated from the rest of the market and what's going on in the world. Is there something now, just quickly, are there areas that you think there are opportunities for in terms of genre? For example, over the past few years, it seems that the young adult market for fantasy, such as Hunger Games, Maze Runner, has, Twilight, that's always been kind of a main staple. I mean, and then now we have you know, do you see other opportunities? Maybe we can start with you, Pia, since you're on. Do you see areas that you'd like to see adapted?
Yeah, look, I really think that we're playing a little bit of a waiting game, and you can certainly see all the studios playing that waiting game. I think people don't know what the next taste of mass audiences is going to be, given the current marketplace. But, you know, certainly one of the things you can do as a writer with skills, that production skills or producing skills, is certainly, as Peter really carefully outlined, try to understand what's in the zeitgeist. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We're really trying to work out what is in the zeitgeist post-COVID.
Great.
You know, I might just add a little bit there. One thing that we haven't mentioned in this session is podcasts, and they've exploded in both terms of type and popularity. And what is interesting to me is that that format of rather compressed information that covers things from true crime to history to recipes, all that sort of stuff. And it seems to me that that will probably influence how people are thinking. There'll be an awful lot of historical surveys, a lot of politics going on, but the idea of, you know, who we are and how we get on with each other, I think is going to actually be quite important, quite dominant over the next few years.
Great. Moy, any genres that you're looking out for as a producer?
Well, we are always looking out for interesting stories. One of the things that we've done recently, which is kind of unique, is to not just adapt a book, but adapt an idea, right? So we are working with the Manchester City Football Club. And the Manchester City Football Club, they have an academy where they train young kids to play football, and be future professional footballers. So we took the idea of that school, and we are actually developing a show based just on that with the Manchester City brand name. So I think the world of adaptations is really, really open. I think, as I said, commercially, we may call it adaptations or whatever, but really what we are trying to do is to kind of find existing audience bases who we can leverage, and that's really it. If there's a book that's worked really well, if there's a comic book that's worked really well, that's stuff that we're looking out for. We are not really very caught up on what age group or what, and obviously not extremely niche, but yeah.
Okay. Lisa, is that something that you'd like to see in the market that isn't out there?
I think, as Moy was saying, I think it's really interesting that, you might pick something up, you might want something just for the idea, and then you build the world, and that often works really well with TV, or you might want something that you can be quite faithful to. I guess I would be trying to consider, is there a built-in audience? Is there a big fan base? Are there lots of sales? Is this property known? That's one question. And the other is, what are the qualities that translate to the screen and that make people want to see it in that form? They're just two.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. Aidan, okay, I'm going to let you have the last word here. Is that something you would like to see?
I'm going to give the very vague answer of simply more. I want to see more. I watch a lot, I consume a lot of media, and frankly, there's not enough of it. I want more, and I want to see specifically, I guess, stories from places that you don't normally see, I guess. Like Peter mentioned this before, there's a lot of excellent, fantastic stories from around the world that, most of us don't get to see for whatever reason, usually having to do with language barriers or cultural barriers. But I think like what Netflix has been currently doing, we're just grabbing different, television shows from around the world and putting them on this global platform for all of us to watch has been great. I am now a huge K-drama fan because I've been watching so many Korean dramas on Netflix, and they can sometimes be fairly similar to each other and I can already guess a lot of the plot points going forward, but they're still super fun. I love them. I've been watching German shows. I've been watching Indian shows. I've been watching, I want to see more, and I want to see more from everywhere in the world, not just our usual suspects of the US, basically.
Great. And with that, we've come to the end of our session today. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And please do look up our speakers online. I'd like to thank everyone. I'd like to thank you, Aidan, Moy, Lisa, Peter, and Pia. And okay, Book Council, are you there? Oh, you are. Okay, and now thank the Book Council and Australian Film, TV, and Radio School for organizing this. Over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Galen, and to all of our speakers. We have now come to the end of our session for this morning. We would like to thank everyone for joining us, and we hope that this has been a fruitful session for you. Please feel free to scan the QR code on your screen to give your feedback about the session. Join us for the upcoming masterclass in the Art and Science of Pitching, co-organized with the Australian Film and Television and Radio School on the 15th of August from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Learn the basics of developing a pitch for adapting your content across varied screen platforms, and attendees also get one-on-one mentoring time with our mentors from AFTRS after the masterclass. Selected attendees will be asked to present at AFCC 2020 as part of the media critique, featuring producers and commissioners from across the region. Tickets are now sold at $40. Limited slots are available, and please log on to afcc.com.sg to find out more. Ticketing charges do apply. As an independent charity with IPC status, the Singapore Book Council relies heavily on individual donations to help us promote a diverse, multilingual Singapore literature. Please donate to us so that we can continue to organize more events like these, especially during these challenging times. You may contribute through giving.sg, and to make a donation, please search for Singapore Book Council Limited. This virtual talk is presented as part of AFCC Digital, and we have similar events coming up over the next few months. Do check out the AFCC website at www.afcc.com.sg and follow us on our social media for more information. Our media handles are now shown on your screen. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we wish you a pleasant weekend. Please note that once this session closes, the live stream will automatically stop and the video will be made available for viewing on the AFCC Facebook page and will be uploaded on the official SBC YouTube account in the coming days. From all of us here at the Book Council, remember to be someone's reason to smile today. Thank you very much.